Really the scariest thing I've ever done was showing up at a grand rounds without PowerPoint. I couldn't bring myself to do that here, but I have a laser, so I'm not afraid. I'm going to talk very briefly. I have about 8 or 9 slides I'm going to race through because the 2 important things we're going to do today is you all are going to do some writing, and then we're going to talk about it in 30 minutes. So let me see what... Yeah, a little bit of background on this. Back in the 90s, an internist at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons named Rita Sharon started publishing a series of tracts or manifestos arguing that medicine needed to rethink its relationship to itself and its patients in terms of narrative. She had gone back and gotten herself a doctorate in literature in midlife. I went and got myself an MD in midlife. It's some people do these things, God knows why. What she argued basically is that we needed to have a better understanding of narrative because that's what patients bring us. They don't come in with vasculitis helpfully tattooed on their foreheads. They tell us a story, and our job is to do what literary critics do, which is try to understand what the story means. She argues that through this understanding of narrative, we could actually even be moved to help our patients in ways we wouldn't otherwise. Rita's a wonderful person. She's very important for me personally, and I think for the profession. I don't agree with her about everything. I don't think narrative is necessarily a totally benign intervention, like anything in the pharmacopoeia, a word which derives from a Greek word for poison. It can have a kick. Not all stories are good. Some stories are bad, as an aesthetic judgment or a moral one. But I think the fundamental point, which is that the tools that that a literary critic deploys to try to understand a narrative structure are enormously valuable in understanding not just our patients, but also ourselves. Because there's always a counter-transferential component to what goes on in the exam room. You know, and this is kind of hard to communicate in some settings because we spend 4 years trying to teach medical schools that they have no internal life. Medical students, they just have no interiority. They're pure in motive and deed, which is not a really helpful thing to tell people when they're struggling with the stuff that we ask them to struggle with. However, having said all that, you try to imagine reshaping the curriculum to include a really deep understanding of literary criticism. You know, we could do it maybe on a Tuesday afternoon in November of the second year, but otherwise, how to get people to acquire these tools is a huge practical question. I threw this in just so you would know I was not a complete science illiterate. So, you know, I know who Harris is. But also to warn you, we're about to get into the territory of dragons. This is where I go deep into the rabbit hole of the humanities, where things that are not easily reducible to algorithms tend to live. What is it about narrative that might make it important? Well, if you consider it, of all the cultural productions our species has engaged in, the oldest one and most universally distributed one that is still being practiced in this room today and is a part of your lives every day is storytelling. It's ancient, it's universal. Clearly, it fits something important in our brains. We have a need for it. If you ever watched, you know, a small child respond to having a story read to them, you know that this is not something that is entirely learned. We come into the world ready for stories. There have been a lot of theorists who have talked about this in a variety of ways. One that I keep coming back to is Dewey, long time ago, who used to talk about the imagination as a critical cognitive faculty. Yet it's a term that, excuse me, these days we tend to, when I hear somebody say imagination, I imagine SpongeBob SquarePants saying it. It's a word we don't take seriously, but it's a hugely important part of our cognitive tool set that we ignore entirely, even though it's how we model our being in the world from minute to minute. And it's also the stuff that can turn into stories, and that stories help us mediate for others. So, the question in front of you right now is, I'm going to ask you to write a story in a minute. You have a blue book chosen to increase your anxiety levels as you write. And I'm going to go through a few tips on how you might want to proceed. But before doing that, I want to return to something I said earlier in regard to where Rita Sharon and I part company on narrative. It's not true that writing stories can make you a better person. It's not true that making things up can make you a better person. I mean, we have Donald Trump as a demonstration of that. We can confabulate to evil ends or to good ends. How do you deploy storytelling in a way that might help you as a clinician or in other areas of your life? The best way to do it is to be aware of the thing that happens to most people when they sit down to write a story. People over the age of 12, by which time education has ruined them for an ability to relate with literature. We get into trouble when we think we know what the story means before we write it. You don't, you can't. All you can do is falsify your experience if you set out that way. So I want you, when you start writing, not to worry about meaning, not to worry about much of anything at all, except telling a story about a particular single event. Things to bear in mind is a story has a narrator. That narrator is a character, somebody you're creating as you write. It's not you, you're the writer. The person speaking to the reader is this made-up person, the narrator, who has a lot in common with you, but it's a previous you that you've outgrown and would hope to understand better. The narrator, think of the narrator as a camera. The phenomenology of a story, a first-person narrative, is all funneled through the narrator who is in the action at a particular time. So you're able to record or report only what you were aware of, knew at the time of the events you're describing, not what you knew later. There is a figure of speech called prolepsis where you say, little did I know, which is fun to do sometimes, but no. The thing that everybody in a creative writing workshop is told, again and again, is show, don't tell. The distinction between showing and telling is one of those things that collapses when you poke at it, but it's useful to think of. The difference between showing and telling is I was scared. Showing is, my heart was racing. You report phenomena. You don't give people explanations. We don't go through the world with a voice explaining things to us. Most of us don't. Life forces us to interpret the phenomena that surround us and put them in some kind of meaningful set of relationships. The inability to do that, or doing it too much, is the definition of psychosis, as is hearing voices explaining things to you. So you just show people. This was here, that was there, this said that said that. Part of what you can report is certainly what I thought, what I felt, but leave the explanations out, because they'll probably be wrong. The story is your instrument for understanding what happened, and until you've written it, anything you say is going to be, at best, a weak hypothesis. So what you're trying to do is simply recreate something that happened to you so the reader can imaginatively re-experience it. And at the same time, and this is the point, if you're doing this and doing it as carefully as possible, you're going to see your experience in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise. You're going to get a better understanding of what you did, why you did it, and what it all meant. Writing a story it's an instrument for understanding your own experiences. So, take 5 minutes. You don't have to finish it, but just start telling a story. Actually, yeah, take 7 minutes, all right?
Everybody should have a piece of paper. Many of you maybe brought a pen, but we'll find some pencils if you don't have them.
No, here's pencil.
Oh, here we go. Gotcha.
You can falsify your miniature golf scores too. It's economic.
Please raise your hand.
be about something that happened to you. Oh, we're talking autobiography.
Okay.
Yeah, this should be about something that happened to you. It should be a true story. Okay, so put your pencils down and close your test book. Still have those dreams. You know, if this is a little frustrating, the reason I spent an entire semester with second year, two sections of second year medical students every year, where they get to meet once a week for 2 hours for the whole term doing this, and it takes them about 4 weeks to catch on. So, you know, y'all are smarter and faster than them, so we only had five minutes. And I also say that because I feel guilty about the next slide, I lied. We're not sharing this. Okay? But I would like you now to take a minute and go back and look at what you wrote and ask yourself what aspects of your story were influenced by the knowledge that other people might get access to. Like that, there's a passage from the Dante's Inferno where he encounters one of the damned and asks him, as he was such a busybody, why are you here? And the damned spirit says, look, if I knew this could ever get back to the surface, I would never tell you, but since nobody ever leaves this place, sure, I'll tell you. You know, Dante was a writer. So go back and take a look at what you wrote, and you know, look at the specifics and ask yourself, was there stuff that you might have done differently if you'd known this was never going to get back to the surface of the earth? And how exactly did you change it? You have a couple minutes to do that. You don't need to make revisions, but that's where most of the work of writing happens. So, what did you notice? Anybody find anything? Or were you absolutely, completely candid the first time around? You don't have to confess anything, but unless you want to. Yeah.
Well, I think the mistake actually we talk about was kind of influenced by the fact that we would be sharing, so I didn't run through about 10, but not done that.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I have $20 for you after this. Does that sound familiar? Did you go through this process of what do I actually want to write about? Yeah, of course you did. It's like the job interview question. You know, what's your greatest failing? You know, I'm a workaholic. That's after you go, well, I steal things, you know. Yeah, I mean, who wants to confess to the most embarrassing thing you confess to? And yet, what's the most important thing really to get straight about? You know, why you're a workaholic or why you steal things, you know. But, you know, you're certainly not going to get the job if you choose the wrong thing to talk about. Okay, great, thank you. So even before the story starts, we edit who we are. And so there's a lot of stuff that's probably really important that we do not look at. If you can get past that hurdle, and start writing about the stuff that is a little hard to write about, well, you've taken the biggest step towards getting some value out of writing stories. You don't have to show them to people, but it can be useful to get them down. Anything else you noticed along those lines? Yeah.
I added a lot of adjectives because I was trying to justify what I was doing in the story.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, adjectives. Yeah, oh, they're great. Can you give me a few adjectives?
So mine was about getting lost somewhere, and so I was describing like how exhausted I was and how the cold rain was like soaking in.
They were extolled. Yeah, not my fault. Not my fault. Not my fault. Yeah. All the time. Yeah, right. We all do this, right? Yeah, I saw two other hands going up there.
Almost the same.
Okay, so, yeah.
I kept mine like short, little, tiny mistakes because we only had 5 minutes.
And I don't know how meaningful that is, except here's the thing. The format determines content, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Marshall McLuhan said something similar to that a while ago. Yeah, and again, before you even start, your story is kind of determined for you. What you know about yourself depends on how long you have to think about it. Yeah.
I gave so much context around the mistake that I didn't even get to actually write it.
So there's this wonderful 18th century novel called Tristram Shandy, which is supposed to be the autobiography of this guy named Tristram Shandy. It never gets up to the moment of his birth, and it's like 400 pages long. It's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, were you just trying not to get there?
Yeah.
Well, it's not even a big mistake. I was just wanted to make sure it's truly.
Yeah, you wanted to lay the ground.
Well, and to provide enough context to justify
So
why
you
you made a mistake.
understand me, exactly, yes. Yeah.
I was trying to entertain, so I was going way back and trying to be funny. And, it wasn't really about getting, I never got the mistake.
You were trying to be funny. Shame. Yeah, but no, I mean, that's, making jokes is a way of deflecting a lot of stuff. Yeah.
When I was almost done, I changed my mind and I thought, oh, this wasn't a good, like I wanted to tell a different mistake.
Yeah, I once heard a description of an MFA, creative writing workshop, which went something like, after a 20-minute impassioned defense of Grecianer, and the speaker then retracts everything. Again, there's this sense that whatever story you've got is not right. Oh, I didn't know I was in a room full of sinners and criminals. I mean, this is just the way we are. We all run around harboring, I mean, you're all actually, I have it on good authority, you're all actually wonderful people, engaged in helping other people in a lot of different ways. This is a university, for God's sake, and a medical center. How virtuous can you get? And yet, here we are, kind of afraid of our own shadows. That's human. That's who we are. And yet, I mean, how scary do you think your shadow really is, And yet, if you can get over this very socially trained set of responses, I mean, this is why writers are such antisocial people. I mean, they're required to do stuff that you've spent most of your life learning not to do. And they're not good people either. I'm not saying this is a magic, Tolstoy was evidently a jerk to his wife. I mean, the list is very long. If you could imagine telling the story that you could have told and having the time to do it, and to really go into it and ask yourself, wait, is this really what happened? Is this really what I thought and felt? Imagine getting all the way through to the end of that. How valuable would that be? What could you learn about yourself and your relationships with other people? You'd probably learn a lot. You would probably not learn that you're a horrible person. You would probably learn that you are human and your humanity is inflected in such and such a way. How great. And, the more you do that, the more you might find that it really is helpful in your relationships with other people to know what dog is accompanying you into the room. How much baggage you carry. So when in my case, it's like a patient. A patient touches something that turns out to be a hot button for you, you kind of know it. And you're not as likely to fall into a trap you might have fallen into otherwise. So that's why I teach this course. That's why I do the writing that I do. It's just, I want to understand myself and other people better. And I think it can be a hugely valuable tool for that, but it's not simple. It's so easy to lie yourself. However, there is something about storytelling. There is something about the need to have the thing make sense, to be coherent. It's very hard to lie at length. That if you work on a story so that it actually, all the parts fit together, even if you're just making stuff up, at the end, everything in there is going to be true, because it has to be, because no one that I know can actually lie that well at that kind of length. So there is something of a narrative structure that does enforce a kind of truth-telling if you are invested in telling the story right. So, question?
I don't know how much truth there has to be in that story, but I'm struck that if you have a graphic which is self-similar, you make these patterns that look like a mountain rivulet, you know, with water flowing down a mountain, and you can embellish that ad infinitum, it will seem real. It will seem extremely appealing.
Right, yeah, it will possess the quality called verisimilitude, yeah.
Yes, yeah, I wonder how that applies to how much actual fact you can fit into.
Well, there's a difference between fact and truth.
Oh,
You can lie like thunder in a nonfiction book. It's just a matter of what facts you choose, how you arrange them. You can lie to yourself and everybody and never stray from fact. You can also be deeply, importantly, movingly truthful while making up stuff wholesale. It's hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. Which is why my students don't write fiction. They write autobiography, because that's, you don't have a chance of doing anything coherent if you're having to make stuff up a lot. But there is something about the way a narrative, how we understand a narrative to make sense, that makes it very hard to do it well, to convince people that it actually happened, and to lie to yourself at the same time. It's just, this is the miracle. This is something about what narrative is and how it fits into our brains that I don't pretend to understand. But, it's something over my life, working stories and teaching, that I've come to believe really is true. And it would be great if someday we understood it. But at the moment, that's a part of human experience that we don't have much of a handle on, because it doesn't reduce easily to numbers or algorithms.
Before going on to other questions, I just wanted to shift because we're out of time. But luckily, we're going to have you on the panel next too, so we'll continue. So you maybe actually answer the question as we set up for just a second.
Yeah.
I get a lot of what you're saying from the perspective of the writer. What value does the reader get from the kinds of, in the context of clinicians and medical stories and medical narratives?
That's a great question. I don't claim to know what my stories mean to the people who read them. That's, meaning happens somewhere between the text and the reader. But I can say that I think the value, why I wish that more people entered medical school, at least, with a good background in literature, is a good story. By that I mean one that doesn't falsify human experience, falsify or trivialize, is a pretty good simulation of actual experience. So, if the first time as a scared 24-year-old, you find yourself at the bedside of somebody who's dying in the hospital, if you've read The Death of Ivan Illich, Dickens' old Curiosity Shop, if you've sat at the bedsides of imaginary people dying, it's not as strange to you. And you're going to have a better handle on your own reactions to it than you would have otherwise. We ask people to do horrible things at very early ages, horrible things that could cause huge harm if done wrong. And it's a miracle they do as well as they do. But I think we would all do better if we had a greater experience of each other. And the shortest road I know to that is to read great literature. Not because it's good or bad, but simply because it stood the test of time, so clearly people have found value. This is why in the university we try to preserve some sense of literary tradition, because it's the same reason that we teach medicine the same way we have for the last 800 years. We don't know why, we can't define our outcomes, but we know it works. Same thing with the classics. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. And